The silent plea. The Astrali never knew war. Their civilization had evolved on the azure plains of Stellaris Prime, a world of perpetual twilight bathed in the soft glow of twin moons. Their bodies, translucent and bioluminescent, resembling Earth's deep-sea creatures, were designed for beauty, not battle. Their society valued harmony above all else. Their technologies focused on healing and growth rather than destruction. For 10,000 years they had developed in isolation, their star system hidden within a nebula that most interstellar travelers avoided. The Astrali had no weapons, no armies, no concept of invasion. They had never needed them until the Vex Dominion found them. The Vex ships emerged from hyperspace like predators, angular and obsidian black against the nebula's swirling colors. They descended upon Stellaris Prime without warning or declaration, their engines burning holes through the atmosphere. The Astrali gathered in their crystal spires, watching with confusion rather than fear as the massive vessels settled onto their world. When the Vex emerged, even the optimistic Astrali recognized the threat. Bipedal like humans, but with chitinous, exoskeletons and multiple pairs of glowing eyes, the Vex moved with cold precision. They didn't negotiate or explain. They simply began taking. "They are harvesting our world," Elder Lyra whispered from the central observation spire. Her luminescent patterns flickered with distress as she watched Vex harvesters tear into the living crystal foundations of their cities. "They take our essence stones, our memory wells, our life trees, everything that holds our history." The Astrali Council convened an emergency session, but their discussions of peaceful resolution were interrupted when Vex troopers stormed the chamber. Those who resisted were stunned and dragged away. Those who surrendered were herded into processing camps on the outskirts of their own cities. Within 3 days, half the population of Stellaris Prime had been catalogued, tagged, and confined to labor camps. The Vex moved methodically, their purpose unclear but their efficiency terrifying. They weren't conquerors seeking surrender. They were collectors taking inventory. In the chaos of the first wave, a small group of Astrali scientists made a decision. They couldn't fight, but perhaps someone else could. They retreated to their deepest communication hub, buried beneath the crystal mountains, and prepared to do something their kind had never done before: call for help. "We have no alliances, no treaties," the lead scientist, Elian, said as they prepared the ancient transmitter. "But the void is vast, and surely we are not alone in valuing life." The signal they created wasn't sophisticated. The Astrali had never developed advanced weapons or propulsion systems, but they excelled at one thing: quantum entanglement communication. The message was simple: coordinates, visuals of the invasion, and a plea coded into the universal language of mathematics. They aimed it not at any specific civilization, but outward in all directions, using frequencies so old most modern systems would ignore them. "It is done," Elian said, as the transmitter pulsed one final time before Vex forces breached the facility. "Now we hope." The signal traveled through empty space, passing dozens of uninhabited systems. It crossed the territories of species too primitive to understand it, and empires too callous to care. Most of the advanced civilizations that received fragments dismissed it as background radiation or ancient echoes. But at the edge of a yellow star system, orbiting the 6th planet, a small probe, built by humans nearly a century earlier, picked up the anomaly. Saturn Monitoring Station wasn't considered a priority posting. Lieutenant Sophia Chen had been assigned there after an incident involving an unauthorized rescue mission that had saved lives but broken protocols. Her job was simple: monitor. The old deep space network of probes and satellites logged the data and alert command of anything unusual. Most days were quiet. This one wasn't. "Command, this is Saturn Station. I'm picking up something on the Pioneer frequency. It's structured, deliberate." Chen's fingers flew across the holographic interface, isolating the signal. "This isn't random noise." 12 hours later, the signal had been analyzed, translated, and presented to the United Earth Defense Council. The chamber fell silent as the images played on the main screen. Crystal cities shattered, luminescent beings herded into cages, mechanical harvesters stripping a world bare of its resources. Admiral Hassan was the first to speak. Location? The Cygnus Nebula, sir, about 60 light-years from our outer colonies. Threat assessment? The intelligence officer cleared her throat. The aggressors possess technology considerably beyond our current capabilities. Their ships alone are at least 3 generations ahead of our most advanced designs. A murmur ran through the room. Someone mentioned withdrawal, isolation, self-preservation. The recording continued playing, showing more scenes of systematic conquest. Admiral Hassan stood up. How long would it take us to reach them? With our fastest ships. Pushing emergency protocols, 11 days, sir. Too long, he muttered, but his eyes never left the screen. But we're going anyway. There was no debate, no vote. Humanity had spent its early spacefaring centuries divided, hesitant, careful. But the Mars crisis had changed that. They'd learned, the hard way, that in the vastness of space, hesitation meant extinction. Within 24 hours, Operation Thunderbolt was authorized. 5 warships, not exploration vessels retrofitted with weapons, but actual warships designed after the Mars crisis, were diverted from their patrols. The UES Vindication would lead, accompanied by the Defiance, the Relentless, the Indomitable, and the Dauntless. Not the largest fleet Earth could muster, but the fastest and most combat-ready. Captain Maya Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Vindication, watching her crew prepare for the jump. She'd commanded the ship for 3 years, mostly running patrols and interdiction missions against pirates and rogue colonies. This was different. This was first contact with 2 alien species simultaneously, one being brutalized, one doing the brutalizing. Captain, all systems are green. Jump capacitors charged to 130% of recommended maximum, her XO reported. Casualties if they blow during jump. Engineering estimates total loss of decks 9 through 14. Rodriguez nodded. Make sure those decks are cleared of all personnel. Medical teams on standby. Yes, Captain, she turned to the communications officer. Broadcast to the fleet. All ships, this is Captain Rodriguez. We are about to attempt something unprecedented, an emergency response to an alien distress call. We don't know what awaits us, but we know what we stand for. Humanity has promised itself that we would never again stand by while innocents suffer. Today, we extend that promise beyond our species. Jump on my mark. The next 11 days were a blur of preparation. While the ships pushed their engines beyond safe limits, Marines drilled in the cargo bays, engineers modified weapon systems based on the limited data they had on Vex technology, and science teams analyzed everything they could about both species. When they dropped out of FTL above Stellaris Prime, the scene was worse than the recordings had shown. Half the planet's surface was scarred with mining operations. Orbital platforms were systematically breaking down the smaller of the 2 moons. Massive Vex carriers hung in low orbit, processing the materials being stripped from the world below. The human fleet's arrival didn't immediately register as a threat to the Vex. Their ships were smaller, less imposing, clearly from a less advanced civilization by their standards. A communication came through almost immediately. The Vex commander appeared on screen, his multiple eyes blinking in sequence, mandibles clicking before the translation matrix converted his speech. Unknown vessels. This system is under Dominion control. State your purpose and prepare for inspection. Captain. Rodriguez straightened her uniform and stepped into view. This is Captain Maya Rodriguez of the United Earthship Vindication. We're responding to a distress call from the Astrali people. We demand you cease all hostile operations against them immediately. The Vex commander's mandibles spread in what might have been amusement. Your primitives received an obsolete transmission and traveled all this way. Fascinating, but inconsequential. The Astrali and their resources belong to the Dominion now. Your presence is noted, your demands are irrelevant. You may observe our efficiency from a distance if you wish, but interference will result in your destruction. The transmission cut off. Rodriguez turned to her tactical officer. What are we dealing with? Their ships outmass ours 10-1, Captain. Energy readings suggest weapon systems beyond our defensive capabilities. Direct engagement would be Problematic. Are they targeting us? No, ma'am. Their weapon systems remain in standby mode. I don't think they consider us a threat. A cold smile touched Rodriguez's lips. Let's use that. The battle plan that formed over the next hour was not one of brute force. It couldn't be. Instead, it would rely on what humans had always used when outmatched: ingenuity, audacity, and the element of surprise. The Vindication moved closer, to the Vex flagship under the guise of observing, while the other 4 ships spread out to seemingly monitor different parts of the operation. The Vex, confident in their technological superiority, allowed this approach with dismissive tolerance. They didn't detect the specially modified probes being released from each human ship, drifting with minimal power signatures toward key points in the Vex formation. They didn't notice when these probes attached themselves to the hulls of different Vex vessels near their primary communication arrays. All teams in position, Commander Ortiz reported from the Marine Tactical Channel. Awaiting your order. Rodriguez took one last look at the view screen. Below, on the surface of Stellaris Prime, columns of Astrali were being marched into processing facilities. Their luminescent bodies dimmed with despair, but still visible from orbit. Execute Operation Thunderbolt, she said quietly. At exactly the same moment across the Vex fleet, the attached probes detonated, not with explosive force but with targeted electromagnetic pulses specifically calibrated to the Vex communication frequencies identified during their brief exchange. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Vex ships, suddenly unable to communicate with each other, fell into disarray. Their coordinated defense grid fractured into isolated segments. All ships, weapons free, Rodriguez ordered. Strike, Pattern Alpha. The human vessels, seemingly insignificant moments before, now unleashed their full firepower. The Vindication targeted the flagship's propulsion systems, while the Defiance and Relentless focused on the weapons platforms of the nearest destroyers. The Indomitable and Dauntless moved into position to intercept any Vex ships attempting to descend to the planet's surface. The Vex, arrogant in their perceived superiority, had committed a fatal error. They had no contingency for communications failure. Their ships, powerful as they were individually, couldn't coordinate their defense. Their overlapping shield systems, which would have been impenetrable if working in concert, now left critical gaps. Human missiles and energy beams found these gaps with precision, guided by tactical systems designed for exactly this kind of asymmetric warfare. The first Vex cruiser exploded silently in the vacuum of space, its destruction illuminating the battlefield with a brief, terrible light. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the surface," the communications officer called out. "It's not Vex, I think it's the Astrali." On the screen, a luminescent being appeared, its patterns pulsing with what might have been hope. "You came," the translation matrix rendered in a soft voice. "You heard us." "We heard you," Rodriguez confirmed. "And we're not going anywhere until your people are safe." As if in answer to her words, the sky above Stellaris Prime lit up as another Vex ship succumbed to the human assault. The battle was far from over. The Vex still outnumbered and outgunned them. But the element of surprise had given humanity a fighting chance. And on the surface below, for the first time since the invasion began, the Astrali's natural luminescence began to brighten, their bodies glowing with renewed hope as they watched their captors' mighty ships fall from the sky. Humanity had answered the call, not with diplomatic caution, not with hesitant observation, but with thunder. Storm of resilience. The orbital battle was only the beginning. Despite their initial success, the human fleet couldn't maintain their advantage forever. The Vex ships were gradually adapting to the communication disruption, establishing backup channels and coordinating their response. For every Vex vessel disabled or destroyed, the remaining ships became more dangerous. "They're learning," Lieutenant Commander Wei said, eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Their shield configurations are shifting to cover the vulnerabilities we've been targeting." Captain Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Then we change the game again. Prepare dropships. We're putting boots on the ground." The decision wasn't made lightly. Ground combat against a technologically superior enemy on unfamiliar terrain was a desperate gamble. But the real battle wasn't for space around Stellaris Prime. It was for the Astrali people themselves. While the space battle raged above, 30 dropships detached from the human fleet, burning through the atmosphere in tight formation. Each carried 20 Marines and combat engineers, Earth's finest, trained specifically for extraterrestrial combat scenarios that had, until now, been theoretical. Colonel Sarah Blackwood stood at the lead dropship's viewport, watching the crystal landscape rush up to meet them. A veteran of the Mars crisis, she'd seen humanity at its worst and its best. This mission would test which prevailed. 2 minutes to touchdown, the pilot announced. Vex anti-air defenses are tracking us, but their targeting systems seem to be struggling with our heat signature masking. They're used to hunting bigger prey, Blackwood replied, checking her rifle one last time. Keep us in the canyons as long as possible. The dropship skimmed just meters above the crystalline formations, using the natural terrain to shield them from Vex sensors. Their destination was a massive processing facility on the outskirts of what had once been the Astrali capital, now a harvesting ground for the invaders. Remember, Blackwood addressed her troops through the tactical network, primary objective is liberation of Astrali prisoners. Secondary objective is data collection on Vex operations. These people reached out across the stars for help and we're all they've got. Let's not let them down. The landing zone erupted in chaos as the dropships touched down. The Vex, for all their technological prowess, hadn't expected a direct ground assault. Their perimeter defenses had been designed to keep prisoners in, not attackers out. Human Marines moved like shadows between crystal formations, their armor adapted with refractive coating that blended with the environment. The first Vex patrol didn't even see them coming. Precision shots from silenced weapons dropped the guards before they could sound an alarm. Entrance secured, Sergeant Hayes reported, his squad positioned at the main doorway to the facility. But we've got a problem. The lock system is biological. Looks like it needs Vex tissue to activate. Bring me one of the guards, Blackwood ordered. The Vex security system wasn't designed to distinguish between willing and unwilling biological input. The severed limb of a Vex guard pressed against the panel by a stone-faced Marine triggered the door mechanism just as effectively as a willing operator would have. Inside, the facility opened into a cavernous processing center. Hundreds of Astrali were confined in transparent cells, their luminescence dimmed to almost nothing. Vex technicians moved between the cells, extracting samples, attaching devices to the prisoners. The human strike team moved with practiced precision, neutralizing Vex personnel with minimal crossfire risk to the prisoners. When the last technician fell, an eerie silence filled the facility, broken only by the soft hum of machinery. Check all cells. Prep for evacuation, Blackwood ordered, approaching the central control console. Engineering team, I need access to their systems. Lieutenant Park, the team's xenosystems specialist, jacked into the Vex network. Their encryption is like nothing I've seen, Colonel, but they're using quantum principles similar to our experimental systems. Give me a minute. While Park worked, Blackwood approached one of the cells. Inside, an Astrali looked up, its body brightening slightly at the sight of the human. It pressed a delicate hand against the transparent barrier, patterns of light pulsing across its skin. We're getting you out of here, Blackwood said, knowing the Astrali probably couldn't understand her words but hoping the intent was clear. The prisoner responded with a complex sequence of light patterns. A Marine with a portable translation matrix stepped forward. It says, "You are not like the others. The Watchers, the Silent Ones." The translation came through, halting and imperfect. "I think it's trying to tell us something about other species who've observed but not intervened." Before Blackwood could respond, Park called out from the console, "Colonel, I'm in their system, but this isn't what we thought." His voice was tense. "They're not just harvesting resources or taking slaves. They're running experiments, genetic, neurological. They're trying to extract something from the Astrali physiology." "What? Weapons research?" "No, ma'am. Something about consciousness transfer. The Astrali have a unique brain structure that allows them to— I don't fully understand the technical terms, but it seems like they can store memories outside their physical bodies in their essence stones. The Vex are trying to replicate this ability. A new voice cut through their communications. Captain Rodriguez from orbit. Colonel, be advised, we have a situation up here. 3 unidentified ships have just dropped out of FTL at the edge of the system. They're not Vex design, but they're on an intercept course. Hostiles? Unknown. They're broadcasting on— wait, that can't be right. They're using Earth commercial frequencies. A cold feeling settled in Blackwood's stomach. Captain, run a check on those signatures against known independent contractors. There was a pause before Rodriguez responded, her voice tight. Verified. Signatures match vessels registered to Nexus Extraction Corporation. Private contractors based out of Mars Colony. Humans, working with or for the Vex. The revelation sent ripples of shock through the ground team, but there was no time to process it. Park had finally unlocked the cell release protocols. Throughout the facility, the transparent barriers dissolved, and confused, weakened Astrali began to emerge. Get them to the dropships, Blackwood ordered. Medical teams, priority treatment, for the worst cases. Engineering, download everything you can from their systems. We're leaving in 10 minutes. The evacuation was chaotic but orderly. Marines formed a protective cordon around the liberated Astrali, moving them toward the waiting dropships. Some could walk on their own. Others had to be carried. All showed signs of experimentation, strange implants, surgical scars, areas where their natural luminescence had been harvested. As the last group was being loaded, the facility's alarms finally triggered. Vex reinforcements were incoming. Colonel, we've got incoming dropships heavily armed, Hayes reported from his position covering the exit. ETA 2 minutes. Blackwood made a quick decision. Hayes, take your squad and the last civilians to Extraction Point Bravo. The rest of us will hold this position and follow on the second wave of ships. Ma'am. That's an order, Sergeant. As Hayes reluctantly complied, Blackwood positioned her remaining forces at defensive points around the landing zone. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had one advantage. The Vex would be trying to recapture, not kill, their subjects. The first wave hit hard, Vex shock troops in heavy armor, wielding weapons that fired bursts of energy that could stun or kill depending on the setting. The human defenders responded with concentrated fire, targeting joints in the Vex exoskeletons, vulnerable sensory organs, anything that might slow their advance. Captain, we need emergency extraction, Blackwood called into her comm as she ducked behind a crystal formation, energy blasts shattering the ground around her. And fire support if you can spare it. Working on it, Colonel. We've got our own problems. Those human ships have engaged alongside the Vex. They're running interference targeting our engines specifically. They're trying to strand us here. The battle on the ground intensified. Marine positions were being overrun one by one. Blackwood lost contact with her left flank, then the right. Her own position was being surrounded. Just as the situation seemed hopeless, the sky lit up with a blinding flash. One of the human warships, the Dauntless, had broken through the orbital engagement to provide close air support. Precision strikes from its ventral cannons carved lines through the Vex assault force, creating a temporary reprieve. All ground forces, this is Dauntless. Extraction ships inbound. Hold position 30 seconds. Fresh dropships screamed through the atmosphere, touching down amidst the chaos. Marines pulled back and ordered retreat, covering each other, refusing to leave anyone behind. Blackwood was the last to board, diving through the hatch as enemy fire intensified around them. The dropship lurched upward, straining against Stellaris, Prime's gravity as its engines pushed to maximum output. Status report, she demanded, still catching her breath. All primary objectives accomplished, her XO confirmed. 83% of Astrali prisoners evacuated successfully. Data package from Vex systems transmitted to fleet intelligence. Multiple casualties. No KIAs confirmed yet. Blackwood nodded, finally allowing herself to feel the wound in her side where an energy blast had grazed her. And the traitors? Captain Rodriguez has engaged the human mercenary vessels. 2 disabled, 1 attempting to flee the system. The flight back to the Vindication was tense but uneventful. The space battle had shifted in humanity's favor once again. The Vex, already disorganized by the initial assault, were now being pressed on multiple fronts. Their leadership structure seemed to have collapsed after the ground team's raid on what turned out to be their primary research facility. The mercenary ships had been neutralized, not destroyed, but disabled and boarded. Their crews were being detained for questioning, their systems analyzed for evidence of collaboration. As Blackwood's dropship docked with the Vindication, the ship's medical teams were waiting. Both human wounded and liberated Astrali were rushed to treatment areas. Captain Rodriguez met Blackwood at the airlock. "Hell of a job down there, Colonel," she said, offering a steadying arm as Blackwood winced from her injury. "What's the situation?" "We've pushed them back. The remaining Vex ships are retreating to the outer system. Without their research data and subjects, they seem to have lost interest in holding the planet itself." "And our new guests?" Rodriguez's expression darkened. "The mercenary captains are claiming they were hired for simple resource extraction, didn't know about the experimentation, corporate deniability all the way down." "You believe that?" "Not for a second, but that's a problem for Earth courts." She paused. "The data you recovered tells a bigger story. The Vex have been doing this, across multiple systems, targeting species with unique neurological traits. They're building something or trying to become something we don't fully understand yet. The implications would take time to process. For now, there were more immediate concerns. Over the next several days, the human fleet established a defensive perimeter around Stellaris Prime. The remaining Vex forces retreated entirely, jumping to unknown coordinates beyond the system's edge. Whether they would return with reinforcements remained to be seen. On the surface, the liberated Astrali were returning to their shattered cities. Human aid teams descended to help with immediate needs: medical care, food distribution, infrastructure, repair. The Astrali, despite everything they'd endured, showed remarkable resilience. A week after the initial engagement, a formal meeting was arranged between human leadership and the reformed Astrali Council. The gathering took place in the partially restored council chamber, crystal walls still bearing scars from the Vex occupation. Captain Rodriguez and Colonel Blackwood represented Earth, along with diplomats hastily dispatched from the nearest colony. The Astrali Council had reformed around Elder Lyra, who had survived the occupation in hiding, and the scientist Elion, whose desperate message had reached across the stars. "We have no formal way to express our gratitude," Elion began, his luminescence patterns glowing with emotion that the translation matrix struggled to capture. "Your species came to our aid when all others turned away. You risked your lives for people you had never met, never even seen before. That's what humans do," Rodriguez replied simply. "At our best, anyway. We have nothing to offer in return," Elder Lyra admitted. "Our technologies were focused on harmony and communication, not warfare. We cannot help you fight your battles. That's not why we came," Blackwood said, "and not why we're staying." The decision had already been made at the highest levels of Earth government. A permanent defense force would remain at Stellaris Prime. Volunteers only, but there had been no shortage of those. A mutual protection treaty was being drafted, the first of its kind between humanity and a non-human species. "The Vex may return," Rodriguez continued, "and there are other dangers in the galaxy, but next time you won't face them alone." "And the humans who aided our captors?" Elion asked, patterns shifting to express concern. "Your own kind betrayed. You betrayed us." "They'll face justice," Blackwood assured them. "But they don't represent humanity. They represent only themselves, their greed." The meeting concluded with a ceremony the Astrali insisted upon. Each human representative was presented with an essence stone, a small crystal that glowed with inner light. "These are our most precious gifts," Elder Lyra explained. "They contain the memories of this time, of your courage. When held, they allow the bearer to feel what we felt when we saw your ships appear in our skies, when we realized we were no longer alone." As Rodriguez accepted her stone, a wave of emotion washed over her. Not her own, but that of the Astrali people. The despair of captivity, The fading hope and then the sudden brilliant surge of joy and relief at the sight of human ships descending from the stars. The stone grew warm in her hand, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. In that moment she understood something profound about both species, Astrali and human. Different as they were physically, they shared something essential: the capacity for hope, the refusal to surrender to darkness, the knowledge that reaching out across the void wasn't futile after all. 3 months later, the first permanent human settlement was established on Stellaris Prime, adjacent to a recovering Astrali city, not a military base, though security forces remained, but a cultural exchange center. Scientists, artists, teachers from both species working together, learning from each other. The Astrali learned of Earth's long, often violent history, and marveled that such a species could evolve beyond its conflicts to reach for the stars with open hands. Humans learned of the Astrali's profound connection to memory and consciousness, their ability to preserve experiences across generations through their essence stones. And throughout the galaxy, word spread of what had happened at Stellaris Prime, how a peaceful species had called out in desperation, how humans, not the most advanced, not the most powerful species, but perhaps the most determined, had answered that call with thunder and lightning. Other powers took notice, some with concern, others with newfound respect. The Vex Dominion reassessed their expansion plans, marking human space with warning indicators. For humanity, it was a defining moment. They had proven to themselves and to the galaxy that they were more than their limitations, more than their flaws. They could be the storm that broke the silence, the thunder that answered a cry for help. And for the Astrali, luminescent in their rebuilding cities, there was a new constellation in their cultural consciousness. The 5 human ships that had appeared when all hope seemed lost, bringing with them not just salvation, but a promise. In a universe vast and often cruel, no one who called for help would face the darkness alone. Not while humanity had ships to fly and the will to use them.